So in this video, I want to explore addiction and compulsion and how it works. So right now I have a headache, I have a neck ache, I have a back, so I have a headache here, I have a back of the neck ache here, and I have a neck ache here. I have a little bit of throat burn, and I have some shoulder tension, and just some general stress. So, what have I done a little bit too far? So one is, and I have some ache in my solar plexus and belly, and a little bit of ache in my low back. So what happens is I start to feel this pit in my solar plexus of some kind and feel a mild panic as an emotion starts to surface. And as that's happening, I feel an impulse to protect against the emotion. And so I basically, sometimes it feels like fun and adventure. Other times it feels more like panic. But when a certain feeling like it's like right here, it's a really sickening feeling. It's very tender. It's right in my solar plexus, and it's like on the one hand I want to vomit stuff up, and on the other hand I want to stuff stuff down. So there's kind of this dual tension, and I think it's the combination of a sickening feeling, a sense of not having any control and dissociating a little bit from my body, and 3, of I guess not knowing where to go with it, and at times having a feeling that it's a bit hard to breathe into it. And so the response to that is that I want to do something. So this is an antidote to frozenness, a sense of being out of control, a sense of being dissociated and not having boundary. And I want to have control, and I want to have boundary, and I want to do something, and I want to distract from the sickening feeling. So then I respond in any number of ways. So one of them is smoking. One of them is ritual. One of them is sleep. One of them is movies and surfing. One of them is eating, and eating to a state of discomfort. So, because if I can fill my belly to a point where it feels mildly uncomfortable, that discomfort distracts from this ache in here. And so that's, a response. But it's basically an effort to push my physical body to a point of stress, pain, or sickness to avoid this down here. And the emotion that, in this case, I'm trying to avoid is grief. And the grief that I'm mostly trying to avoid is the sense of innocence being betrayed. The grief of innocence being betrayed, which I had happen with my father and mother and teachers, and more recently with my therapist. There's a sense of grief at the innocence being betrayed. And I think there's also a lot of grief at betraying my own innocence. That, again, in this numbness and this distended feelings, that there's a part of me that needs to push some boundary and feel something. But in all of that innocence, beauty, naivete, kindness, innocence has just been ignored, shut down, hurt, stamped on, broken in a certain sense, because if you respond with manipulation and strategy, it's no longer innocent. And so there's a real deep sense of sadness and loss of that innocence, the ability just to be small, have needs, and have those needs be met in the small way. It's just very, very, very painful when that's shattered and broken repeatedly. I think it's one of my biggest wounds of all time. And there's no substitute for having innocence and being able to trust. Trust that it'll be loved, taken care of, protected, honored for its vulnerability. And I think I lost that for the last time at 2 years old. And it's just very, very, very difficult to go into that feeling. And just see the beauty of that, and at the same time feel that innocence being snuffed out and broken. So the best addiction that I'm able to find for this state is to hold my partner with desperation. So if I can hold her tight and hold her body against this part of my solar plexus and feel the agony and the misery and the desperation and the ache and the emptiness, but feel that I'm not entirely helpless and I'm not entirely alone. And I'm not entirely scared. And I'm not entirely out of my body because I can feel someone else's body next to me. If I can do that, it doesn't make it bearable, but at least I can find myself regularly and come back to the feeling again and again. And that's what I'm really grateful to my partner for, is that she's the only one in my life who does not let me down in this area. And for the most part, I don't let her down in this area also. And so I feel that my life has significance in being that place for her. That's actually a very nourishing response, to know that someone, even if it's me, does care enough about another person's innocence to be that safe and protective part for them. And for her, the terror is so terrifying that she can't go into her body unless a very strong pressure or weight is on her body. So sometimes I grip her in a vice-like grip, and I just hold her with all my strength to me. And if I hold strong enough, she will start shaking, breathing, and coming back into her body. And I'll also lay on top of her so that she has my body weight to do that. And that allows her to come back into her body. And I will guide her visually and help her be conscious of how old she is and stuff at that moment. But I don't think there's a way back in to the body without human help. And it's criminal, in my opinion, that we live in a culture that terrorizes children to a point of dissociation, but then does not train either the parent, the siblings, or any therapist to do this kind of thing, to bring someone back. And that culturally shames and stigmatizes desperation, need, helplessness, dissociation, and overwhelm and anxiety, such that there's no safe haven for someone going into these feelings. And even with that safe haven of my partner, I still overeat. I still choose to smoke. I still watch too much media at times. I still argue just to get a sense of contrast and resistance and presence, to push against something, to feel where my boundaries are. And because I know that's why I argue, I at least give my partner the courtesy of saying, I'm going to argue with you, or I'm arguing with you right now for this reason. It's not your fault. You're not doing anything wrong. I just need to argue with you. Which is relatively common. I've had several lovers who shout or argue or fight when they're scared, but they won't say it. You say, "Are you scared?" And they'll say, "No, I'm not scared." And they actually make up some cockamamie crap about how they need to argue, as opposed to just saying, "No, I just really need to shout and argue right now so that I feel safe." And I wish they could just thank me for being willing to argue with them so that they can feel safe. And I also do that with blame sometimes, for the same thing. I need to blame you so that I feel safe. And I think that we can often tolerate being used for something shadowy. I say shadowy just because it's not normally in the light. If it's honored, spoken, and appreciated. Like, I don't know about you, but if someone says, "I need to do something that isn't really fair, it isn't fully kind, it isn't fully healthy, but I need to do this because of this, this, and this, and it has nothing to do with you. And I really appreciate that you're someone that I can tell and who's not going to punish me for that. Number one, appreciate that you care enough about me to want to play the role. Number three, I appreciate you for playing the role and helping me, and I'm sorry that this is the best I can do right now." I can deal with that. There's very little I can't take when it's presented cleanly, consciously, and directly. What I can't deal with is being attacked, blamed, shouted at, etc., unfairly, number one. Number two, when there's no acknowledgement or preparation, there's no lead time preparation to help me prepare to hold the space, and there's no acknowledgement that it's not fair. And then three, when I'm not able to be let close, and if I bring up what seems to underlie it, that it's denied and lied to. And then fourthly, that I'm punished for being punished. That rather than the person dealing with the fact that they need to fight or do this or that for some reason of their own, usually it's they need to turn fear into anger. That I'm basically blamed and then disrespected and dishonored because they believe the lie of their blame, which is simply because they can't own that they need to do that, because that would make them feel weak. And they need to feel strong in that terrain. So first they abuse me, then they blame me for being abused, then they deny both the blame and the abuse, and then they disrespect me in some way and punish me for believing the lie that they believe. I will not take that. If someone starts arguing over nonsense, and then when I bring up what's going on, they deny it. It's very simple. I can just tell them to go home, or I can disengage and leave and tell them we can talk about it when they're ready to. And then that may pivot it around. It at least breaks the cycle. But unfortunately, unfortunately, many people go along with that whole program and end up being disrespected, shamed, and abused for being disrespected, shamed, and abused because people aren't big enough to own their stuff. And so that's this ache for me, and it's so overwhelming at times that I don't know where to go with it. You know, that it's just no therapist is around right at that moment. Talk therapy sometimes makes it worse because it's trauma and it needs a certain kind of support, which I'm just barely learning about. So that's it for now.